The Babylon that should not have existed. 4,000 years ago, between the Tigris and Euphrates, rose not merely a city, but a prison of mud and blood. The Sumerians, first inhabitants, already recorded in their tablets the Edimu, the dead who find no rest, who wander among the living, sucking the breath of sleepers. When Hammurabi founded his dynasty upon ancient bones, he did not know he was building upon a cemetery where sand kept secrets the sun should not reveal. The mud bricks that raised his walls were kneaded with water flowing near ancient tombs. Each brick carried the weight of a soul without proper burial. Babylon was not made merely of mud, it was made of dreams of stone. But these were not dreams of peace. The architects worked under blood oaths, binding them to entities inhabiting the spaces between stars. Each arch, each chamber, each staircase served dual purposes. Nebuchadnezzar's summer palace, with walls of blue enamel reflecting the sky like frozen water, hid subterranean chambers where sunlight never penetrated, places where priests performed rituals involving children born during eclipses, whose eyes were covered with lapis lazuli paste so they would never see daylight, allowing their inner eyes, those that only open in darkness, to see what the gods wanted the city to know. Hammurabi was not merely a king. He was a man who understood something that would have driven him mad had he not found a way to contain it. His code of 282 articles was, in truth, 282 locks. Each prescribed punishment corresponded to a specific method of keeping sealed the 7 gods of pestilence, those the oldest texts called only those who come when the doors open. The code was an exorcism disguised as legislation. The stone upon which it was written, diorite extracted from the Zagros Mountains, carried inscriptions at its base deliberately scraped away by priests, something about a pact, about a price the city would pay, not in gold or blood, but in memory. But stones do not protect empires. When the Hittites burned Babylon in 1595 BCE, they destroyed the records of rituals. They burned the names of priests who knew how to seal the doors. And in doing so, they released something that should not have been released. Hittite chronicles speak of the shadow that followed the army back to Hattusa, of soldiers who woke screaming in the middle of the night, speaking Akkadian without ever having learned the language. The Babylon that remained was no longer the same city. It was a place where shadows moved wrong, where children were born without eyes, where wells turned bitter overnight. And so the city was abandoned, not conquered, but abandoned by its own inhabitants, who fled to any place where the shadow would not follow them. For centuries the city slept, not dead, but dreaming. Bedouins who passed through the ruins at night reported hearing voices emerging from the sand, voices that did not speak words, but numbers, sequences corresponding to the positions of stars, but also to depths, to distances between the Earth's surface and what exists below it. Who awakened it was Nabopolassar, a Chaldean who understood that patience is a form of violence. He was not liberating a city, he was offering himself as a host, as a vessel for what the city needed to place in the world. The fall of Nineveh was not merely bloody, it was silent.
When the Babylonians and their Median allies broke through the gates, they found an empty city. Clean streets, intact houses, temples still with incense burning. But there were no people, no animals, no bodies, only a crown on the throne, placed there as if waiting for a head that never came. His son, Nebuchadnezzar, would build not a city, but a mirage of stone, a mirage that produced thirst, that made those who contemplated it desire not merely to possess it, but to be possessed by it. He genuinely believed he could create a city so perfect that the gods themselves would have to recognize human superiority. That heresy was exactly what the city needed. The hanging gardens were not merely gardens, they were a system of containment and channeling. Each terrace corresponded to a planet, but also to 7 levels of protection, 7 seals between the surface and what lay below. The trees were not chosen for beauty, but for their roots, for their capacity to reach depths men dared not dig. They were sentinels, antennas receiving and transmitting signals from something that moved in the depths, something Nebuchadnezzar, in his rare moments of lucidity, began to call that which waits. The processional way was a river of blue and gold, where stone lions guarded the path of the gods. But they also guarded against something. The lions were not turned outward to threaten invaders. They were turned inward, toward the city, in defensive posture against something that would come from within. The Akitu festival, when Marduk's statue was transported along the entire way, was not merely celebration, it was recalibration, realignment of the seals that kept the doors closed. And at the center of everything, the ziggurat of Etemenanki, 7 levels, 7 planets, a ladder to heaven made of mud and ambition. The 7 levels, each a different color, were a scale of frequencies, a ladder allowing ascent, but also descent, allowing what was above to come down, filtered through 7 layers of protection. The temple at the top was where mediation happened, where the true priests, not the officials who performed public rituals, but those who served in the night, in darkness, communicated with what lay beyond. Inside the Esagila temple, a statue of pure gold represented Marduk. But Marduk was not the only inhabitant. The most secret records spoke of the other, of the one who dwells behind. The golden statue was merely an interface, a mask the true inhabitant wore when it needed to interact with the world of the living. And that interaction was not pleasant. The kings who prostrated themselves before Marduk did not leave untouched. They left changed, with something in their eyes that was not there before. When Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem, destroyed the temple of Yahweh, deported the Jews to Babylon, he was not merely conducting a political campaign, he was collecting components for something Marduk's priests were building in the deepest levels of Esagila, something requiring a specific number of souls, souls of a specific people, souls shaped by exile and deferred hope. The Jews, with their religion of a single invisible God who refused to worship Marduk, were more than workers, they were raw material. Their difference, their strangeness, their refusal to mix was a form of protection, a way of keeping intact the specific quality of their souls, necessary in pure state. The astronomers who recorded planetary positions with millimetric precision were not merely doing science, they were performing surveillance, surveillance of something that moved in the heavens, but also of something that responded to these movements.
Eclipses were not merely astronomical phenomena, they were doors, moments when the separation between what is above and what is below became tenuous. The mathematicians who invented the division of time into 60 parts were not merely measuring, they were containing, creating a numerical cage within which time could be observed, recorded, predicted, but not escape. For 43 years Nebuchadnezzar reigned, and in each of those nights he spent awake, in each of the hours he spent in Marduk's temple, he was changed, transformed, gradually replaced. Not his body, which remained intact until final illness consumed it, but his essence, his humanity. Nebuchadnezzar, at the end of his reign, was no longer a person. He was an extension of the city, a physical manifestation of what Babylon needed to continue existing. And when he finally died, something was buried with him, something that was not exactly him, but that was also not exactly something else. What was human in Nebuchadnezzar was buried, and what remained, what continued to inhabit the palaces and temples for some days after the official death, was something that needed to be contained, sealed, neutralized, before it could find another host.
But empires built by something that uses a man as a host rarely survive the discovery that the host is disposable. Nebuchadnezzar's successors were smaller men, more limited, more concerned with immediate political power than with the cosmic ambition that fed their predecessor. And that smallness, that limitation, was fatal. It was the breach through which what had been contained began to escape. Evil Merodach reigned 2 years before being assassinated. Neriglissar reigned 4 years before dying on campaign. His son reigned 9 months before being assassinated. When Labashi Marduk died, something was released, something that should have been gradually transferred, contained, neutralized, was released all at once, and that release created a shockwave that manifested as political instability, foreign invasions, loss of control over provinces, erosion of the economic base, corruption of irrigation canals, salinization of fields, famine in cities. Nabonidus, the last independent king of Babylon, was a stranger, but his strangeness was the strangeness of someone who understood, who had read in texts he should not have read, in chambers he should not have accessed, the truth about what Nebuchadnezzar had done, about what the city really was. He was not preferring to restore 1,000-year-old temples to governing his own people. He was trying to rebuild the containment system, trying to reactivate practices that had been abandoned, gods that had been forgotten, rituals that had been prohibited. He was trying, desperately, to close the doors his predecessors had left wide open.
But he had no time. When Cyrus the Persian united tribes into an army Babylon did not expect, this was more than a political threat. It was an opportunity for the city, already tired of trying to keep itself alive, to finally rest, to finally stop dreaming, to finally allow what had been contained to be released. In 539 BCE, the city that had never been conquered by force opened its gates, not to enemies, but to a liberator who promised to restore the gods Nabonidus had abandoned. And that opening was a transfer of responsibility. The city, tired of trying to contain itself, let another assume that task. Cyrus was astute. He returned stolen gods. He allowed exiled peoples to return home, and he transformed Babylon into a province of his empire. And that transformation, that reduction from capital to province, from center to periphery, was the death sentence the city needed. Not a violent death, but a death by neglect, by forgetting, by lack of attention. The Persians kept the temples open, performed the festivals, preserved appearances, but they did not feed what needed to be fed. They did not perform the rituals that should be performed in the subterranean chambers. When Babylon tried to rise against the Persians, twice the response was fire and iron. Xerxes razed the ziggurat, and in doing so, in tearing down the 7 levels of Etemenanki, in dispersing the bricks that contained within themselves centuries of containment, he was performing an exorcism, violent, imperfect, dangerous, but necessary, and the statue of Marduk disappeared forever. It was not destroyed, it was hidden. It was taken to some place where it could not be found, where it would remain, dormant, waiting. Alexander the Great arrived as an admirer. He planned to rebuild Marduk's temple. He died before beginning, and that death, that premature death of a young, healthy man in mysterious circumstances, was more than coincidence. It was consequence. It was the containment system, already weakened, already permeable, reacting to the attempt at reactivation. Under the Seleucids, Babylon became a shadow. A new capital, Seleucia, stole its river, its commerce, its reason for existing. And that transfer was the most effective form of containment ever achieved, not destroying, but ignoring, not fighting, but replacing. When the Muslim Arabs arrived in the 7th century, they found only ruins and a language no one read anymore. The cuneiform writing, used for 3 millennia, became undecipherable. It became silence. It became stone without voice.
But Babylon did not die completely. Its astronomical knowledge traveled to Greece. Its system of 60 parts still divides our hours. The story of the flood echoed in the Bible, and the captivity shaped Judaism forever. In 1899, a German named Coldway began to dig, and what emerged from the sands made the world stop to look. Today, the Ishtar Gate lives in Berlin. The stone lions that guarded gods 4,000 years ago now guard tourists. And in Iraq, where kings once proclaimed themselves gods, soldiers patrol among ruins. History, relentless, repeats its cycles of power and dust. Babylon teaches us that civilizations do not die of violence, they die of forgetting, and of rivers that change course. But as long as there are eyes to see ruins and minds to ask who built them, Babylon lives, not in stone, but in our curiosity. And the next time you look at a clock, remember, each minute that passes as it passed for them, between 2 rivers, under the same sky.
Did you enjoy the story, The Babylon That Shouldn't Exist? Leave a like, turn on notifications, and subscribe to the Echoes of Stories channel for more epic tales. Until the next adventure.